Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has told Russia it will pay a, quote, high price if it invades Ukraine. Baerbock is heading to Moscow for talks today to try to defuse what she called a highly dangerous situation as Russia continues its buildup of troops at the Ukrainian border. At a meeting with Ukraine's leaders on Monday, she said Berlin would do all it could to guarantee Kyiv's security.
Fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine have jangled nerves here in the region. After visiting a memorial to anti-government protesters who died in 2014, Annalena Baerbock says any solution to the conflict must come through dialogue, not arms. Meeting Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Baerbock offered an explicit gesture of support for Ukraine.
Solidarity. European solidarity for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. That is not up for debate, not for us and not for me personally. Any further aggression would have a high price. We've emphasized that today once again.
Russia is building up its troops on the Ukrainian border. Both the European Union and the US have threatened to impose further harsher sanctions if Russia goes ahead with an invasion. For years, Ukraine has called on Germany to deliver arms to help boost its abilities to defend itself. Kuleba says Russia doesn't share Ukraine's cooperative attitude towards diffusing the tensions.
We have
a very constructive stance on this matter. But unfortunately, our constructiveness isn't mutual on Russia's part.
Baerbock will now meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov in Moscow. She's keen to revive four-way peace talks in the Normandy format, which includes Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia.
Well, our chief international editor, Richard Walker, joins us now. Richard, the wartime US President Roosevelt once famously said about politics and diplomacy that one should speak softly and carry a big stick, meaning that you have to back up your demands with believable threats. Did Annalena Baerbock bring a big stick to Moscow, and what could it be?
Yeah, well, that's the big question, Gerhard. What the stick that is up for discussion is certainly not a military stick. The West has been clear that they're not going to intervene on Ukraine's behalf if the Russians do invade. So we're talking about sanctions here, economic sanctions. Now, the West hasn't really been spelling out exactly what kind of sanctions we'd be talking about here, apart from saying that they would be more severe than the sanctions that are already in place against Russia, and there are lots of those, and evidently they have not served to deter this behaviour. Now, with a focus on Germany, the biggest focus is on the gas pipeline Nord Stream 2. I'm sure our viewers will have heard that many times over the years. It's a gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. It's been highly controversial. It's recently been completed, but is not yet in operation. And the big discussion in Germany is whether that should be used as leverage against Russia, whether the German government should say that is not going into operation if the Russians do take up further aggression against Ukraine. Now, the problem here is that the German government itself is divided on the question, with the Social Democrats, the biggest party, have generally been in favour. The Greens of Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister there in Moscow, adamantly against. The Chancellor at the moment being relatively ambiguous about all of this. But this is going to be potentially a problem for Baerbock there in Moscow, with Sergey Lavrov, her opposite number, knowing of these divisions in the German government. And of course, a threat of that kind of sanction is only credible if the other side really sees unity behind it. So, and of course, if a threat is not credible, then it's not that much of a stick.
Well, Baerbock said she wants to revive four-way peace talks, the so-called Normandy format, which includes Germany, France, Ukraine and Russia. Is it too late for that?
Well, critics would say, yes, it certainly is too late. This format tried for years to find a solution to the problem, but it essentially sort of ran into the ground towards the end of last year, and this is where this new level of the crisis has emerged. What the Germans would say in its defence is that it's still important to kind of keep this lower level diplomatic work going, that there may be steps that could be achieved on a lower kind of level through this format, which could be built on later. But certainly there are questions whether it is kind of the kind of measure that is going to make progress at this time where the questions between Russia and the West are so fundamental.
Richard Walker there, our chief international editor. Thank you, Richard. Well, from Moscow, I'm now joined by DW correspondent Emily Sherwin. Emily, what can we expect today from this meeting?
Well, Annalena Baerbock is starting her visit here in Moscow at the State Tretyakov Gallery, which you see behind me, at an exhibition about Europe, which actually was in Berlin before. So I think she's kind of trying to start by building some kind of a symbolic bridge to Russia. But I think it's clear that she has a tough day ahead. On the one hand, Annalena Baerbock has said that she'll be searching for common ground through dialogue. The Russian side, I think, will be really checking her out as the new German foreign minister. She had rather tough positions about Russia and also about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline before becoming German foreign minister. So I think the Russian side will be kind of listening closely to what she says today, publicly and behind closed doors. The two sides will be talking about bilateral relations, of course, but I think the elephant in the room is the rising tensions on the Ukrainian border and the security guarantees that the Russian side has been demanding from the West, including on NATO eastern expansion. As we heard, Baerbock has suggested reviving peace talks in the Normandy format, so with Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany at the table.
So what influence can Germany or even Europe have on Russia at this stage?
Well, I think that's the big question. From the Russian side, Germany and even Europe basically have nothing to do with what they've been demanding in the talks that we've seen in the past few days, and the language that we've heard coming from Russia in the last few weeks and months. In December, Russia issued demands on a limit to NATO eastern expansion, and those demands were issued directly to the U.S. And now, after several rounds of talks last week with the U.S., with NATO, and also with the OSCE, so with European countries, Russia has demanded that the U.S. And NATO issue a written response to its demands. So it seems like Russia is basically only really willing to talk to the U.S. When it comes to these security demands, and in a way, Europe is kind of on the sidelines watching.
Emily, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has said that the bloc was ready to prepare further sanctions against Russia. How long can Putin stick to his policies in the face of these sanctions?
Well, I think it's, first of all, important to point out that the Russian side has repeated again and again that they are not planning an attack on Ukraine, but they are also not willing so far to take the military threat off the table. When it comes to sanctions, from the Russian point of view, the West really has no leverage on Russia. I think, first of all, the U.S. has made it clear that they won't defend Ukraine militarily in case of an invasion. And today we've been hearing media reports, at least, that one of the biggest sanctions that the West had been kind of holding over Russia, which is that the country could be cut off from the SWIFT banking system, that could be off the table. The U.S. has denied that. But I think it looks like even the sanctions arsenal, isn't too strong, at least from the Russian point of view, which, of course, the country has become used to sanctions over the last few years as well.
Emily Sherwin in Moscow there. Thank you, Emily.